Marvel rival publisher NetEase lays off Seattle team. Following news of layoffs at NetEase's Seattle studio last Wednesday, the Marvel Rivals publisher is reportedly set to cut a number of other jobs in reconstruction efforts. Announcement of the layoffs came from now former game director Thaddeus Sasser, great name, in a LinkedIn post where he subsequently endorsed his former coworker Gary McGee's skills to, quote, help find these incredible people new jobs. Sasser's LinkedIn profile described his team focus being on game and level design, with another post from Sasser claiming the idea of team-ups where specific pairings of characters allow for special moves or conditions to occur originated from him. The move baffled players as Marvel Rivals has performed exceptionally well since its release last December, where player counts on Steam have consistently stayed above 100,000 at any given moment. It's worth noting that they've crossed the line of 40 million players for Marvel Rivals. Bloomberg includes in a recent report that Nico Partners analyst Zhang Xiaofeng estimates Marvel Rivals earnings to be more than $200 million, and that NetEase's games division increased by 1.5% during a time where gross profits fell by 2.6%. In the same Bloomberg report, CEO William Deng has reportedly reduced support for about a dozen games while shuttering numerous projects following a more active role over the past year. Swedish Audio Liquid Swords laid off an unknown number of employees last week, while developers Worlds Untold and Jar of Sparks will no longer be published by NetEase and are currently seeking a publisher replacement. Sources at GameFile corroborate Bloomberg's reporting that NetEase, quote, plans to divest itself of the majority of its overseas teams if funding can't be secured. Deng, who can apparently intuit how a game works after watching it for a few seconds, wishes for the company to focus on titles that hold mass market appeal and incentivizes player spending like Eggy Party and presumably Marvel Rivals. Now, Connor, you got to talk to me about this. Intuit what a game can do in a few seconds. What is that about?
I think it's a classic case of rich billionaire CEO mentality of I know everything. And so he believes he can look at a game and know how it works. This is from Bloomberg, so they have their own sources. I can't even imagine what it's like to deal with this guy. It's probably extremely annoying, just like how it's extremely annoying that they're laying off, developers, level designers specifically, from a game that has made potentially $200 million, a large amount. We don't know if that's exactly true. Take that with a grain of salt. But the point is they've made a lot of money. And the fact that they're already cutting jobs, it's indicative of a larger scale, plan to take money away from investing in overseas studios and keeping it in China. And so, while this isn't necessarily a bad thing on its own in an industry where we're constantly facing layoffs, do we want a more destabilizing force? No, we don't. And clearly, it's for profit maximization. Apparently, to the rest of everything else that NetEase has done recently, they've haven't met those expectations, but the games division exceeded it.
Yeah.
Because of Marvel Rivals.
Yes.
And yet, it's just a tale that's old as time at this point of, regardless of whether your game does well, you're potentially going to get laid off, even if you have value down the line. Because Marvel Rivals is a game that is going to be entirely based off of how it proceeds in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Around that much.
Yeah.
And so you would think you'd want more people on your side, but getting rid of them, it's clearly not because you needed to, but because you want to.
Yeah.
And when you have a self-absorbed CEO getting more invested in your games division, I don't think there's any other explanation other than a guy who's, greedy and grubby and thinks too full of himself.
I do think that is certainly an element of it, and I agree with everything you've said there. The simple matter about Marvel Rivals and its success is, even though it may have bought them some more patchwork, it's not fixing all the holes in the sinking ships.
Right.
They had a gross profit deficit this year. They didn't earn as much this last year as they did the year before. So clearly, they're spending more than they're earning regardless. That's a company-wide issue, right?
Yes.
So even though the success of the Marvel Rivals team is great and wonderful, and we want to continue seeing that, it's not enough to stop the bleeding. And when you're bleeding from everywhere, the solution from up high is to make drastic cuts around so that we can just get everybody below that thing. It's the matter of, okay, we can lay off 10% of the workforce across the board, or we can shut down entire studios, And some of those studios do bring in revenue, and even though they would meet the chopping block, is it better to just to kind of shrink them down in order to kind of keep that revenue up? It's that weird business stuff where like you got to think of the bigger picture there. Now, I have no doubt that the CEO of NetEase Games has probably got some greed in him, and is probably
clearly full of himself,
hoarding more of the money than he needs to, right? But I do think things such as, this follows the trend that we've been seeing for the last couple of years of the money's shoring up. There's not enough money to go around, in the size, at the state of things, the scale of things, how we've been operating in the industry. There's not enough money to keep that sustainably, right? So, you hear it from a bunch of independent developers. There's no money. Nobody's looking to publish your game, so that's really the tricky part. And so NetEase here, I think, has a very, very tricky problem here where they're looking for funding and there isn't any going around. Marvel Rivals, great source of funding right now. Hopefully it will be able to, stop the sinking ship, but we're still sinking right now.
Yeah, but the core issue that I keep thinking about is you already seem to be doing that with closing studios and closing projects overseas.
Yeah.
And they also were, I didn't include it in the piece, but they themselves aren't even coming out with a game from their own Chinese studios until, I believe, 2026.
Yeah.
Is
well, I imagine, Marvel Rivals is going to hold us down all year.
Exactly.
And I'm sure that was their plan from the beginning anyway. They knew they weren't putting out a game. Marvel Rivals hit in December so that it can hit a good, fiscal year.
Yeah.
Check. It can hit the fiscal year in a good way. And so now, we're looking at wild success through Marvel Rivals. Yes, we have to shrink the team down. Yes, it's mostly, if not all, entirely affecting overseas things like their Seattle team here. But, these might just be the necessary things that we have to do. Now, is there other ways? Is there better ways? Is there more moral ways? Probably. But this is the world we live in and what we got to deal with. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying that we can't do better. We absolutely can do better. We should do better. But this is the trend. This is the hellscape that we have to live in right now.
I just push back on the notion that the layoffs, as they pertain to Marvel Rivals developers, was not based off of any kind of cold rationale of saving money, but rather just we're axing people's jobs. They're overseas. Get rid of them. Because they clearly add value. If we take the Thaddeus at his word, and I have no reason not to, he even came up with an entire aspect of the game that's incredibly fun and people love the
team-up abilities.
So these people had a value. They showed it, and yet they still got shuttered. All the other studios, that's fine. It sucks, but especially in the case
it's not fine.
I think it overall is, particularly with Jar of Sparks, not with Liquid Swords, because those were just layoffs.
Well, I was also reading there's a lot of like major developers under the NetEase branch that are currently being auctioned off or they're trying to find someone to buy them out, most notably Quantic Dream.
Yeah, we're not seeing the end of this. They're going to be doing it even more so. It's probably going to be given a bigger spotlight due to Marvel Rivals now.
Which good luck getting Star Wars Eclipse out the door at this rate.
They were questioning that as well. They were, they're iffy on their projects. We don't know exactly what they're going to do. But I was saying it's good in the sense that Jar of Sparks and Worlds Untold aren't being published by them anymore, because I feel like a lot of the power that these, greedy corporations lie is in the publishers. Like Saber Interactive, for example, they were under Embracer Group, and now they're able to do their own thing, and I think they're going to prosper a lot more because of that, and I believe that needs to be a greater standard within the industry, rather than just relying on the benevolence of these big guys who clearly will cut you the moment they get the chance to do so. This being a case example of it, because core of it, Marvel Rivals, why are you cutting these guys? You're not doing it because you need to. You want to because it's part of an ongoing plan.
Quite frankly, I'm sure it's much more expensive to keep studios that are overseas as opposed to ones that are at least on your side of the hemisphere. Whether they keep it all in Chinese or not, I'm sure it's cheaper for them to fund studios in Japan, to fund studios in Korea, as opposed to fund studios in America, or in any of the Americas. That's where things get a little dangerous. Now, of course, You might correct me here and say, they're cutting across the board in other countries as well. But it's just cheaper to keep it all in-house in the same country that you're in, regardless. So the Seattle team is getting cut because they are overseas. Yes. Yeah, undeniably. But as unfortunate as that is, that's the way that they can keep the ship up. You know what I'm saying? As I continue to use this sinking ship metaphor.
I just don't think that makes sense with the Seattle team. They are, I cannot remember because it's a Japanese name. It was one of the people who made it's a Japanese studio. it was recently founded by, I think, an ex Yakuza creator. I can't recall what games they've made so far, but they were getting cut as well. Like, I think funding for right now. And
Okay.
so it clearly is just China where they want to focus on it.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
But it's kind of hard to say, oh, well, that's an okay thing to do while we're in the
I'm not.
industry we are now.
Well,
I
I'm
know
not
you're
saying
yeah.
it's okay. I'm just saying that this is the reality of the
Justifiable.
situation. Like, yes, justifiable from the cold-hearted business perspective of it,
Yes.
and that's where I really want to land. Is the video game industry is sinister as hell right now.
Yeah.
Like, you don't see this in any other entertainment medium where we are just throwing artists away. Maybe the music industry a little bit, but usually that's a much smaller team. We are seeing in mass a massive amount of artists like just get abused, taken advantage of, and discarded in mass in numbers we've never seen before. This is why industries like the movie, the film, and TV industries have unions, is to protect your rights in these scenarios. These Marvel Rivals Seattle studio guys, they don't have the rights in this scenario because they're all, at the beck and call of some billionaire at the top, and that's super unfortunate. When you join a union in film and TV and on the stage and in voice acting, all these things, there's a little bit more like job security that's going on, and we just don't have that in video games, and it really just makes it the most confusing and like confounding industry in the world when we're talking about entertainment. It just doesn't make any sense, and I think it's mostly because we're not seen as an entertainment medium, we're seen as a technology industry, which is true. We are rooted in technology, but I mean, arguably so is film and TV. But like, they're just more focused on entertainment, where this is more focused on the actual technology itself. So like, the developers aren't seen as artists that need to be protected from these higher ups. They're seen as technicians who can be used and replaced, right?
Exactly.
And that's just not the case in video games because it's so art centric. And so it's just really unfortunate that we're just seemingly nowhere near the end of it. I was watching an interview by Greg Miller of Kind of Funny, who interviewed Matt Pescatella. Is that who it was?
I know that name. Was he connected to a studio that got?
He's a big numbers guy. He's someone who really breaks down. Yeah, Matt Piscatella. Yeah, he breaks down like all the NPDs and industry stats and the current state of the industry, like the real nitty gritty number stuff and so forth. It was a fantastic interview. I absolutely recommend watching it. I'm not going to be able to paraphrase what was said in that correctly, so make sure if you're watching and listening to this to go give that a check out as sort of a required reading. Connor, I recommend that you go and check that interview out. It's very fascinating stuff. And it's just like sort of like a little bit more insight into how these things work. When you talk about green lighting projects, when you talk about red lighting or canceling projects, how all that works, the different benchmarks and checkpoints that they set up along the way, the different scales that they work with in terms of estimated profits, estimated spending, and all that, so forth. It was a really fascinating interview. I really recommend watching it, but like, it just further cemented to me that when these things happen, they know it's happening well in advance. It's not like executive teams, leadership teams aren't like caught off guard by this. I'm talking at the higher level. Obviously, the leader of the Seattle team didn't know he was going to get fired for his super successful game. And that's very, very disappointing that it all happened. But it just goes to show that, like, guys, our planning was bad. We the industry had very bad planning coming out of the pandemic, very bad planning. And instead of recognizing that the spike in sales during 2020 and 2021 was the ceiling, they thought it was the new medium, and it's not. And so it's really unfortunate that we now have to suffer the consequences of this. And sure, now we're still getting a lot of games, and we're still getting a lot of great games at this point. But what are we getting in 5 years? With this mass exodus. Like, if you think the PlayStation 5 doesn't have games, man, nobody's going to have games in 5 to 10 years, because we fired all the artists and they got disenfranchised and they just don't care. Or we're just going to have to humble ourselves as an industry and take a step backwards, because the tech race, to be the most fidelity driven, the most beautiful graphics, the most cutting edge technology has inflated our budgets to the point to where it's now working against us. We're eating our own tail, at this point.
Yeah. It's not going to get better. in the near future.